Hello, this is Juwon Ogungbe. I'm here to tell you about my new book, All Roads Lead to Peace. It's now available to buy on Amazon in the Kindle and paperback formats. It's really cool.
Holding your hand as we walk through the park, I feel your strength as the light I can trust in the dark. Feels like a crime, leaving you for the last time. Deep in my heart, I don't want us to part. You feel my pain, but you don't want the crying to start. Feels like a crime, leaving you for the last time. Now we'll have to learn how to stand firm in our new world of pain. And I know things will not be the same if I come back to live here again. And I know things will not be the same if I come back to live here again. Tears in your eyes as we say goodbyes. No looking back to face the pain that we cannot disguise. Feels like a crime, leaving you for the last time. Feels like a crime, leaving you for the last time. Now we'll have to learn how to stand firm in our new world of pain. And I know things will not be the same if I come back to live here again. And I know things will not be the same if I come back to live here again. And I know things will not be the same if I come back
he kind of brought a lot of vibrance and power to the workshop, should we say?
Yes, it was the anti-apartheid era as well. So I mean, like, it was sort of the right place at the right time with the right people and all of that. Yes.
Absolutely. So there was this community of artists, I suppose, around that. So that the Writers' Workshop was part of that. And so I first remember you not only as a writer, because you were part of the Writers' Workshop and a poet, but also as a solo musician first thing. And then later on, you developed a 5-piece band with playing with people like David, like I mentioned, Olajimi, and the Lyberg brothers, Stephen and Houston, the saxophonist Michael Nielsen. And then I kind of around that period, you started to, like I mentioned, the Jazz Cafe, you had a residency there. And I think, am I right in saying that really helped you to hone your craft? Playing out like that every...
Well, yes, in the sense that it was good to have a regular spot, to be at the coalface on a regular basis and have people come there, and then if you were going to make mistakes, you'd make the mistakes and sort of go over them. Whatever kind of hang-ups you might have psychologically, you go over them, and all those things. And then also it got to the point that because, well, I remember like John Dabner, who used to run the Jazz. In fact, the Jazz Cafe was John Dabner's brainchild. He was very good at coming up with ideas, but not very good at business. So in the end, he lost the Jazz Cafe, especially the one that's in Camden Town now. But I mean, like John Dabney used to describe me as prolific, and because at the time I was always coming up with new music. There'd always be new songs, new things. So I was always trying new things out, and so it was an opportunity to expand my repertoire and to get better at performing all this new music as it was coming to me. Yeah.
I think that... So then you went on to move away from like that big band. We're going through like this history because we're going to lead up to what led you to write the book and what led you to call it this time. Those things are going to come. But you moved away from that kind of big band. People were really excited about the big band, and then you changed. All of a sudden, you went into music theatre, which I can say that departure was inaugurated with a play that you wrote called Early Morning Wahala. It was a music theatre piece which was really risky because people had known you, they'd been comfortable with you as this type of artist, and then all of a sudden you just suddenly switch and just become something completely different. And I remember when you inaugurated this era, if you like, with Early Morning Wahala, you performed this play. It was a solo piece, yeah?
No, Early Morning Wahala wasn't a solo performance.
Oh no, not you. There was other musicians.
Yeah.
But dramatically.
Yeah, dramatically, it was solo.
Yeah, but I remember there are other musicians like Jan Hendricks.
Yeah, Hendricks.
Okay, but then it was performed at Conway Hall. This is in central London, and I remember the tension in the audience because a lot of the people knew Juwon. And they kind of didn't know what to expect, because like, oh, this is going to be classical music. You don't know. It's like we've gotten comfortable with Juwon as an African, this African big band, and the Afro rock or jazz, and and then all of a sudden there's this going to be we don't know what to expect here. So there's a lot of tension, and I can say at the end, I think it must have been the relief that there was a standing ovation to go, wow, oh, thank goodness, it went all right. Because honestly, people were thinking, this could be a disaster, because we thought it was such a risk. Sometimes when an artist performs in a certain way, and people get used to it and they get successful at that, and then they do something completely different, oh my God, I don't know what to make of this. Is it classical? Is it opera? Is it, you don't know, and it could be disaster. And in the end, it was absolutely phenomenal. And there was a standing ovation. And people were relieved. They thought, because obviously they were on your side, but there was that tension there. Did you sense that?
Well, I mean, I didn't just sense it. People spoke to me afterwards, people told me things and all this sort of thing, So I think at the time it was pushing the boat out a bit. And it's funny because there's a friend of mine sitting at the back there who I remember another piece of mine, which was called Brothers of Heaven, which was about a myth about how masquerades came to exist. And in this myth, there was something about a monkey that died, and then the bones of the monkey for whatever reason were disguised as like the bones of the king, and the king, they were dressed up, and it was presented in a ceremonial way so that people couldn't tell that the father of the king was a monkey or something like that. And then the next day I got a phone call from somebody. Oh, my daughter saw your performance yesterday, like in Peckham Library, and she's really upset because you're saying something about, us like, descending from monkeys and things and all that. And I'm like, you don't take it on face value. You know what I mean? It's a myth that was already there. I didn't create the myth.
But that one is
But it's just there. It's like in the Ifa kind of thing. It's like part of the Yoruba kind of cosmology. And I remember this friend of mine who's sitting just there. I remember I told him, and he said, "You push the boat out a bit, don't you?"
And actually, that is. But I mean, I was particularly interested in the trickster because, like, the concept of the conception of a trickster in African mythology is very interesting as a sort of a character that is kind of unruly, but somehow it gives people, through that story, gives people in society a license to be a little bit different, a little bit. Did you see it in that way, or?
Well, I suppose it's a kind of like brain over brawn type of idea, isn't it? It's like you can sort of use your wits. Who is the African American scholar who wrote about that? Was it Henry Louis Gates? One of those guys, who wrote about the trickster. And the idea is that it's the sort of the triumph of our wits over people using sort of that might is right type of idea.
And then for those of you who might not be familiar, when we're talking about the trickster, we're talking about characters that you're very familiar with in folklore and so on. When we talk about Anansi, the spider, or Brer Rabbit, or Ijapa, these are all people that are mischievous characters. They create havoc, but they're very intelligent. Somehow, some kind of order comes out of the havoc that they create, and there's some sort of moral compass that's charted through these stories. Yeah, would you agree?
Well, yes, but I think it's really about sort of being able to turn the tables in situations where all is not as it should be.
Mm.
Like that you don't have to kind of, you don't have to crack a nut open with a sledgehammer when you can use your wits and find another way to do it.
Right, yeah, that's interesting. A very good way to put it. Yeah. I would say, Juwon, is a kind of a signature, I think, that's gone throughout your career, that you've never stood still. You've always wanted to kind of experiment and push boundaries and So I think, because from there, you then went to, you studied at the Guildhall, I think, in composition.
Yes,
I think contemporaneous with our mutual friend, Cora, and cello player Tunde Jegede at the same time.
Yeah.
And after that, your singing style changed. Became sort of towards opera, started to move towards opera, I realized. And around about, this time, I think you started to get interested in including in your writing and this influence of traditional Yoruba folklore and mythology and cosmology. And I think it was interesting because I myself at this time had just written, Person, Divinity and Nature, a book where I talked a lot about Yoruba mythology and so on. And I remember I was also friends with a mutual friend of ours, Lati, who worked in schools and drew on this Yoruba mythology, going into schools, doing plays on Ijapa. Ijapa is a trickster.
Yeah, the tortoise.
Absolutely. And then you, kind of against this backdrop, you put out a work called Time and the Trickster.
Time and Trickster, yes.
And which signaled another kind of artistic kind of reincarnation, I think, because now you were drawing on Yoruba folklore and cosmology, and these influences in your work, to me, kind of made your work almost, it's like the possibilities became endless in what you could create. I don't know if you saw it in that way.
Well, I think art music, for want of a better description, people talk about classical or whatever, but I call it art music, which is basically music that's it's not just music that's functional, it's music that's created in a sense to be, to be more sort of expansive in vision. I think a lot of that music, initially was created for the temples and the courts, and was created to somehow critique or symbolize, things about the mythology. And certainly amongst Europeans, they did a lot of that, where there's, all this Greek mythology, Roman mythology, all that kind of stuff. The composers engaged with that, as well as the church music of, the Palestrians, and going on to Bach and Handel and all that kind of thing. And I think it felt to me like, in a similar way, that my music could could interact with the mythology of cultures that were closer to me in terms of heritage. So I started from the Yoruba heritage, but then I think I've done other things since then. Yeah.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on, I think when we're talking about you moving to this operatic style, the whole logic of it seems to come full circle when a couple of years ago you wrote your own opera on Makeda, the Queen of Sheba. And it was in collaboration with a Bristol community of Rastafarians, I believe. Or, I mean, can you just tell us the story of how you came about that opera? Because I think it's...
Okay, well, I mean, like, it started actually from going to Ethiopia. I went through Pitika Batuli, who you mentioned earlier. Because Pitika, my story of engagement with Pitika has gone way beyond the days of Janako arts to meeting in other continents and other countries and whatever. And we were in Ethiopia, and this is for an African Union sort of policy formulating conference. And we were taken around in the National Gallery in Addis Ababa, and there we were presented with the compound of the Queen of Sheba, and the guy told us this story, which comes basically from what's called the Kebra Nagas. I didn't know about the Kebra Nagas before, but basically it comes from this, I guess, sacred text. How about King Solomon? She visited King Solomon and he seduced her, etc., etc., which brought about the dynasty. I think Menelik I was the first of the Ethiopian emperors, which ended with Haile Selassie, which is of significance to people of the Rastafari faith, because Haile Selassie is like a divine figure to them. So anyway, this guy told the story, and when he was telling the story, immediately I kind of thought, this feels like an opera. This feels like music drama piece, And then I got an opportunity I worked in Zanzibar, and I worked at the Dal Country's Academy of Music in Zanzibar, in Stone Town, and we did a sort of research and development period there. And then after that, I approached a friend of mine who runs Theatre Peckham, Suzanne McLean, saying, Suzanne, I'd like to develop this piece further. Would you host it? And she said yes, on the condition that you can have some young people involved in it. And so that led to, I got Arts Council funding, and I created what now exists as King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba.
Yeah, well, that was amazing because, I can't communicate to you just the feeling of that opera, but it was just something else. And it wasn't even live, it was online, because this was during the pandemic. And but it really was something that I
So that performance was part of the festival, and the festival was called Freedom in the City, that because Haile Selassie lived in Bath when he was in exile during the Italian occupation of Ethiopia. And he lived in a place called Fairfield House. The person who organised that festival is an academic who was a trustee of Fairfield House, because Selassie bequeathed the house to the people of Bath. So it was, it was kind of there was this festival that was all based around engaging with Selassie and his presence and Rastafari as a system, a belief system, but then you could say the opera was the jewel in the crown within that program.
Yeah, thanks for that. So in that way, it's people can take from it. Sometimes it may be for them, sometimes it may not be for them. Sometimes they might identify with some of the characters in the anecdotes and stuff like that.
Yes.
And you can, so I think in that way, it's a kind of book which a lot of people will be comfortable going into, dipping in and dipping out, and taking what they can from it.
Sure.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So, with that, I'd like to kind of say, to kind of round up. I feel it's been a natural sort of development for you, really, because you've gone through a lot of incarnations as an artist, now you're moving into the realm of, being a writer, literature, and so on. And looking at other writers, I know in the past discussions we've talked about Ishmael Reed, and how that has influenced you, because he has a particular view of art, doesn't he?
Yeah, well, Ishmael Reed is very much into a voodoo kind of aesthetic. I mean, so you could say, well, voodoo was his thing, that his worldview was kind of rooted in that. But very much, trying to be as Afrocentric as he could be as a Black American man, I guess. Yeah.
So it sort of makes sense that you're moving into literary areas. Obviously, he's influenced your music in some way, or that worldview has influenced your music in some way, with your music like Samedi is Saturday. Talking about Haitian.
Well, I guess, only in the sense that, once you know about these things, then it becomes part of your vocabulary, and then, you think, oh yeah, of course. So I did like Samedi is Saturday. That was the single that I did during the pandemic time. I wasn't particularly thinking of Ishmael Reed at the time, but I did think Baron Samedi, there was something about the imagery of Samedi at the crossroads, and the fact that everything was so uncertain around the line, the crossroads of life and death, and all of that with the pandemic. And Baron Samedi as a symbol, a figure, a symbolic figure that somehow was that, he was there. He's meant to be someone who's like a custodian, I suppose, of that particular liminal space. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we're moving now closer to why you wrote this book, because there's a point at which you developed a podcast, and I think that was during the pandemic, was it?
Yes, right at the beginning of the pandemic.
Yeah.
It's called Multiverse. I normally do it on a Sunday. I did it last night. I haven't started circulating it yet, but I have actually done, but not as I normally circulate it. It's a very short podcast. It's like you could call it like a soliloquy or a monologue for it's about 5 minutes long, but I always do a little song at the end of it. So there's always a musical element in it. And I've been doing it for 4 years now. I've got over 200 episodes of Multiverse, which you can find on Spotify and various other platforms. And Jack Luckman, who is an old schoolmate of mine, is an author and publisher, and he approached me and said, I think some of what you're saying in these podcasts would be really good if they were a book. That was about a year ago when he approached me and said that. And so that was when the idea, you can say like the idea was planted as a seed in my mind that led to this book we have here. But also before that, there was a time when I was working in the USA. I was at the University of Richmond, Virginia, sort of like writing a show at the time. And I went to a psychic fair and saw a medium, and this medium said to me, "You could write a really cool book. And it could be all about sort of traveling, and it could be about engagement with different cultures, and it could be about your experiences of like sort of being socially adaptable, in different cultures and that sort of thing, And then she said, "All roads lead to peace," was what she said at the end of that riff. And so, like, when Jack Luckman said what he said, and then like, I was like, "Oh yeah, all roads lead to peace." Okay.
Yeah. So, do you see any? Can you say anything more about the resonance of that title for you? I mean, in terms of, is it in a way reflective of aspirations for our planet, for our world?
I think it's
because I say that because like the image that you use is obviously quite an ecological image. It's a tree, and I immediately am drawn to that kind of thinking that way.
Well, you think about it like that, then that's about nature, isn't it? It's about what comes from within, in that sense. And I feel that it's about people are living and letting others live. That each road in itself leads to a form of peace. If we kind of like stick with what is ours and not kind of superimpose or expect other people to be who or what we are, but to just follow through on whatever our inclinations, what our inclinations might be.
Yeah. I think I kind of get a sense within the, because I haven't started to read all of the book, but and I do know about the podcast. I do know your podcast and so on, but it seemed to me like a kind of it's a collection of stories and reflections and observations which talk about the human condition.
Yes.
And it might not have struck you, but I think that when you look at writers, like I'm thinking of somebody who's writing in a style which could be your style in a way. You know the writer Zora Neale Hurston and her style.
Yes.
Because you're talking about the human condition through anecdotes and stories and so on, and reflections on experiences, and I feel like potentially that's the kind of it reminds me of that type of writing, because she used to take anecdotes, she used to take stories from folklore and things, and she used to reflect on the conditions of African Americans, and she was almost like a sort of an anthropologist, which is sort of like what you're doing, because when you're looking at the human condition, it's almost like a kind of laboratory where you're investigating our feelings and our worldviews and so on through simple stories that everybody can relate to.
Well, yes. Obviously, like writing when I was making those podcasts of Multiverse, I wasn't thinking they were going to end up in a book. They were written to be heard, which is very different from writing for something to be read. But I mean, having said that, when I agreed with Jack Bookman that it was a good idea, then I went through them and then I'm tweaking them to make sure that they made sense as things that could be read also. And so that's all, I guess, part of the process of discovery, finding new things, even though you might not have initially planned to do them.
Okay, Juwon, thank you for that. I think we could open the space up to some questions. Is that
Yes,
right?
yes, I think we should, yeah.
Okay. Well.
On arrival, my friend wanted me to tell him in detail about all the items on the menu. And as the host in this situation, I was expected to foot the bill. He looked at the starters and asked me about pepper soup. I advised him against ordering it because he's of Afro-American heritage, and I was not aware of exceptionally piquant dishes in the cuisine of the American South. My friend accused me of being a cheapskate and not wanting to pay a large bill. I relented and let him have the pepper soup. He took one spoonful and looked me in the eye, saying, "I know you brought me here to make me suffer." Then we argued over the main courses. He said, "I want some amala with beans." Amala with beans. For those of you who know. I objected, explaining that these dishes are not eaten together. It was a memorable evening and we had a lot of fun. Of my parents' generation, but from a different part of the African diaspora, He wore baggy clothes that looked African. There were several occasions when folks we had met asked if he was my father. But now all the jokes and fun are over, as I found out this week that he passed away. My friend offered me a lot of mentoring through the years. I want to thank his larger-than-life spirit, wherever he might be, for the guidance he gave me.